Thank you very much for joining me as we meet an Irish writer whose latest book has upset quite a few in the Christian world. Colm Toibin's novella, The Testament of Mary, was one of 6 books shortlisted for this year's prestigious Man Booker Prize. It's a bold reimagining of the life of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and quite a departure from the woman venerated by Christians the world over. Colm Toibin was here recently, so we just had to find out more.
Finding a poem like when you are old and grey and full of sleep, and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read of the soft look your eyes had once and of their shadows deep. And,
Irish writer Colm Toibin
like
is considered one of the world's finest novelists.
And we had a record at home reading the poems of W.B. Yeats. And we would put it on for pleasure and as a family, or even when our parents were out, and sort of listen to it.
In Melbourne for this year's Writers' Festival, he's drawn big crowds, eager to see and hear the master of his craft.
I'm not making this up.
In 23 years, Colm Toibin has published 16 books, 3 nominated for the Man Booker Prize, among the richest and most celebrated of writing awards. Ireland, the Catholic Church, Spain, Henry James, the IRA and AIDS have all featured in his writings, fiction and non-fiction alike. His latest work, a reimagining of Mary, mother of Jesus, has proved his most controversial. Colm Toibin's visit here was the perfect opportunity to explore how his Irish Catholic upbringing, with its reverence for the Mother Mary, has imprinted itself on his writing. Well, Colm Toibin, welcome to Compass. It's great to meet you. In your autobiography, A Guest at the Feast, you talk about the picture of the Virgin Mary hanging above your mother's fireplace in your mother and father's bedroom where you and your brother were born. And I wonder whether that whole imagery of the mother is at the core of your formation and, a very core image for you.
Yes, I think that's true. The only power a woman had in the society was that she controlled religious practice in the house. It was the mother who decided what mass you went to. It was the mother who decided what time rosary would be. Her relationship with the church gave her a sort of power.
1950s Ireland was dominated by the Catholic Church. Colm, the second son in a family of 5, was born in 1955 and raised in Enniscorthy, south of Dublin. A dreamer who stuttered, Colm was an altar boy and bell ringer. So what residue of that faith lies with you, would you say, of that formation?
It's in my blood. I mean, it's very hard to say. I think it'd be very hard to say, having had that sort of Irish Catholic upbringing in those years, and being sensitive to it. In other words, I think some people could brush it away. Well, I couldn't. I think some of it mattered too much to me, to be able to say, oh, I could move out of it into a pure form of atheism where none of it would ever mean anything to me. I don't think that could happen. And it's been nourishing to a large extent in that it has brought in aspects of beauty, aspects of where you come to believe very early on that sentences matter, that language can lift.
The love of language and books was almost inevitable. His mother was a prodigious reader, and his father was a teacher who at 49 suffered a stroke and died 4 years later.
My father died when I was 12, and I was alone. My brother was younger, he was 4 years younger, so he was 8, and we were alone in the house with my mother then. We had other siblings, but they had gone from the house, so there were just us. And for those years, I became acutely conscious of what loss felt like, the sort of silences around it, the things that were not being said. I mean, rather than it being constantly mentioned, it became something that wasn't mentioned much.
At 15, Colm became a boarder at a Catholic boys' school that in the following decades would become infamous when the sexual abuse crisis in Ireland was finally investigated.
I went to St. Peter's College, Wexford, which was one of the schools that really figured very largely in the Ferns report, which is the most complete report we have, just taking one diocese.
Which was the report of the Royal Commission, which
yes,
I think took 10 years.
Certainly from that time, I can think of 3 or 4 priests who went to jail. And I have to say that while I was there, that was unimaginable as an idea. The idea, but even when I read some of the crimes about, they happened in front of my nose. And also they had already happened, some of them, and some people knew. And it explained certain things.
And nothing ever happened to you?
Nothing ever happened to me, and nothing ever happened to my friends. And but when you meet people on the street, and I do because I live there now, you know, you want to stop and say, you just don't know, even to this day. You see, what you don't know to this day is who else just didn't go to a psychiatrist, didn't tell anybody, never told anybody, bottled it up.
Did you have a good education, though, despite all of this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in other words, you know, going to the diocesan school aged 15 for me was a huge opening up of my intellectual life and my imaginative life. And they were brilliant teachers, including, I have to say, some of the priests who later went to jail, who later were abusers, were brilliant, brilliant, brilliant teachers.
Colm flirted with the idea of becoming a priest himself.
When I was 16, I didn't go home at Easter, much to the shock of my parents or my family. I stayed to do a vocations workshop. Some of us stayed to see if we had a vocation for the priesthood. And a lot of people came to talk to us. And every single thing was on the agenda. In other words, those issues that were burning issues at the time, contraception, divorce, abortion, church-state relations, celibacy, all of those things were discussed, as well as theological matters. No one ever mentioned homosexuality. It was simply unmentioned and unmentionable. But if you're 16 or 17 and you're homosexual, say as I am, as I was then, and you think, well, this would solve it, but it isn't as simple as that. There's also the idea that you would like to do good, or that you would like to have a responsible role in society. And you see the priest as having that. People need priests, you know, at certain crucial times. People admire them. So you would like to be that too, because you don't want to be despised. So all of those things together can give you what might be called a vocation for the priesthood.
But Colm didn't go on to become a priest. Instead, he studied English and history at University College Dublin. After graduating, he lived in Barcelona for a time before returning home, working as a journalist and editor, publishing his first novel in 1990. But it's his latest work, The Testament of Mary, that's proved to be his most provocative. Some even say blasphemous. In April, the play opened on Broadway to great critical acclaim. and was nominated for 3 Tony Awards, including Best Play. Starring Irish actress Fiona Shaw, The Testament of Mary depicts a very different Mother Mary to Christianity's venerated version of her. Describe your Mary.
She's extremely intelligent. She's angry. She will say what she likes now that time has passed. She's utterly fearless. I suppose if you were putting it into modern parlance, and I'd rather not, but if we were to say that she's a victim of some sort of trauma and that traumatic stress is all over her language, and that she speaks in a way which is heightened, which is taut, which is staccato.
But
and she's a great noticer. What she notices around the time of the crucifixion is excitement. She notices some of the disciples, instead of being afraid, are excited. She notices that other ones want this to happen. And she keeps saying, is there any way we can stop it happening? As I think anyone would under those conditions, whose son or member of your family or loved one. Can we stop it? Is there a way he can escape and everything can be okay? And she realized that no one else wants this except her. And that makes her angry the more she thinks about it later on.
Colm Toibin's Mary is bitter. She doesn't believe in Jesus' divinity and suspects the disciples are using her son for their own religious agenda.
He was the Son of God, the man said, and he was sent by his Father to redeem the world. By his death he gave us life, the other said. By his death he redeemed the world. I turned towards them then, and whatever it was in the expression on my face, the rage against them, the grief, the fear, they both looked up at me, alarmed. I was there, I said. I fled before it was over, but if you want witnesses, then I am one. And I can tell you now, when you say that he redeemed the world, I will say that it was not worth it. It was not worth it.
It's an incredible sort of statement of someone facing life as they see it and not for a moment embroidering it.
Yes, I was interested in the idea that she's nothing to lose now, and that, as she says herself, the truth must be spoken once in the world.
You can see how controversial and challenging that is to many people of faith, that here's a woman, an imagined woman, but the mother of Jesus, basically saying, he threw his life away. Why on earth did he do it?
This is not the life of Brian, you know, that I have no interest in making jokes on this subject, that I was attempting the most serious way I could to explore something which I thought was on my mind as a set of images. And I wanted to bring the audience with me rather than push them. And it's the same with the book.
The book, a 104-page novella in fact, published in late 2012, is the slimmest work ever to become a finalist in the Man Booker Prize.
I'm just wondering, first of all, where in your imagination this particular telling of events came from?
In the year 2000, I had to give a course in the New School in New York. I call it the New School. They call it the New School. And it's quite competitive if you're teaching there because no one might come to your course. So, you know, there could be 10 people teaching, and all of them will want to go to someone who's much more fashionable than you are. And you'd be left sitting there, you know. So I had to really decide what to do about this. So I gave a title to my course. I called it Relentlessness. And I thought I would get a certain sort of what they call student who would come, you know, who would be intense, who would, you know, really care about something or other. And so I did. I mean, they were much more relentless than I was. And so I thought we should start at the top, really. And we should look at Medea, Electra, and Antigone in various translations, at the staccato language of the translations, at the heightened tone of these women in pain. What I had in mind was that the voice would be the voice of someone with nothing to lose anymore, where it's all over. So she's not the meek mother, and she's not the grieving mother. She's the angry woman whose tone is relentless, and whose days and nights are filled with the memory of what happened, and the fact that almost she alone is the only one willing to face the enormous cruelty of what occurred. I tried to see his face as he screamed in pain, but it was so contorted in agony and covered in blood that I saw no one I recognized. It was the voice I recognized, the sounds he made that belonged only to him. He howled out words that I could not catch. And maybe I should have moved towards him then, no matter what the consequences would have been. It would not have mattered, but at least I would not have to go over and over it now, wondering how I could not have run towards them and pulled them back and shouted out words, how I could have watched and remained still and silent. But that is what I did.
You are playing with such a piece of massive symbolism here with Mary.
Well, you see, she is a symbol of something to some extent, in that she's a symbol of meekness, of humility. She's also the figure of the grieving woman who's powerless in the world, and that gives her, for Catholics, a sort of power. That, in other words, you can implore her because she will understand your suffering, because she too suffered.
Really, she's a model of forbearance, isn't she, in the received tradition?
Yes, she's a model. Well, you see, she really fits anything we want her to fit, because she's Queen of Heaven. I mean, the Immaculate Conception is too abstract, really, but the Assumption for all of us, I think, is really magnificent. You know, in those paintings, she was assumed body and soul into heaven. She's alone among mortals to have been assumed body and soul. But then there's also the idea that she was dragged through this extraordinary suffering, and that she showed extraordinary forbearance during it, for example. But that's in the Gospel of St. John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't much have her there.
No.
So she flits in and out of this story. But what's strange is, and what's really strange is, the way in which she comes to dominate Catholicism, especially in certain countries, considering the lack of evidence for her.
Could a person of ongoing faith, because you say you've lost your faith now, could a person of faith have written this? That's what I'm getting at.
Oh, I think if you started to imagine it from her position, it could lead you there. He was so far from the child I remembered, or the young boy. He was beautiful then, and delicate and awash with needs. There was nothing delicate about him now. He was all displayed manliness, utterly confident and radiant. Yes, radiant, like light is radiant, so that there was nothing we could have spoken of then in those hours. It would have been like speaking to the stars or the full moon.
My impression from the Testament of Mary is not that you've lost your faith, frankly, but that you're still in its thrall.
Yeah, I have a friend, and one of my closest friends in Ireland, that constantly taunts me, saying, "Don't try this anymore on us, you're ex-Catholic. This is the most Catholic book." But I didn't know that when I was writing it, but yes, there it is.
Colm Toibin lives part of the year in America and is Professor of English Literature at Columbia University in New York. The rest of the time he lives in Dublin, where he's watched the unfolding sexual abuse crisis that's engulfed his country.
An investigation has found that the Catholic Church in Ireland knowingly allowed the abuse of thousands of children in its care. It found a shocking catalogue of sexual, physical and emotional abuse, including rape. But as the ABC's Philip Williams reports, not one of the perpetrators is named.
They were supposed to be places of care, of refuge, of love.
Just talking about the crises facing the church at the moment, particularly over sexual abuse, how do you rate the church's ability to emerge from that?
I mean, it's been a very difficult time, I think, for Catholics because it seems they didn't understand something fundamental. They didn't understand just how much parents care about the safety of their children, just how much it matters to fathers and mothers, the idea of your 5-year-old, your 10-year-old, your 15-year-old. Where are they now? Are they safe? Are they okay? Are they happy? Are we looking after them properly? That all over the world has been a central part of nurturing since time began. And if you're part of a group of people who because they're celibate and do not have families, they seem not to know this. They seem not to understand it. Now, I don't have any children either, but I think I know about it. But it seems that they didn't, that they put other things, such as, for example, the safety of the church, the reputation of the church, ahead of the safety of children. And that is a chasm. I mean, it really is a very deep one, which means there's a huge difference now between the church, the official church, and people.
I want to say to anyone who has been hurt by any failure on my part that I apologize to you with all my heart.
There were so many people affected by it. And it wasn't merely some industrial schools or some orphanages, it was all orphanages. And it wasn't merely some diocese, it was every diocese. So that it was something endemic within the structure of the system. And it's very difficult for any organisation to recover easily from that. I mean, part of the problem in Ireland was partition itself. Instead of having 1 million Protestants living in our society, we should have been constantly involved in debate in our country, in our parliament. That was cut off in the early 1920s. So the whole idea of having a Southern Ireland being a Catholic state, in retrospect, seems to have been an absolute disaster.
So maybe you could sketch an outline of the modern Catholic Church in the modern Ireland.
I think the Church itself has to make really the fundamental changes about. I think priests have to marry and have to have family. But also, young men are not joining anymore. And certainly young women are not becoming nuns. So that we're going to have an absolute crisis about, the number of people available even to say Mass. But it's very difficult to separate, but I think we must, the belief of people versus people's response to authority. And I think it will take a lot more for people to stop believing what they were believing before, because I think that's so built into the DNA of people.
So you don't want to see an Ireland without the Catholic Church?
I suppose I follow someone like William James in saying that there seems to be within us as humans some element that does not merely tolerate the material, that we want one more thing. And that may come in doubt, it may come with music, it may come with love, it may come with many things, but one of the ways it comes is through religious belief. I mean, I remember when one member of my family was dying and she wanted a priest. And I just remember ringing, calling, and it was really late at night. And he said, I'll come up, and him coming and just the work he was doing, that sense of duty, that sense of care, that sense of, after midnight, well, she's obviously, and then how much it mattered to her.
Do you imagine you might be calling for a priest yourself when you're on your own deathbed?
I find the idea of extinction, of personal extinction, to be deeply strange and unimaginable, and not something one faces with equanimity. And I don't think I'm alone in this. But what's very interesting is when I think about the great fervent Catholics I have known, when it came to those years, those days, they didn't want it either. No. It wasn't as though they were saying, oh, take me now or tomorrow is just fine, I'm ready to go. Faith seemed to leave people alone during those crucial times of their lives. And I think the human fear of death is essential to us. It's not as though we're going to have a group of philosophers emerging who will be able to lead us through this, or indeed a group of priests or bishops who will be able to lead us through this more easily.
Colm Toibin, it's been fabulous to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Next on Compass.
I wanted to go to the remote areas. I wanted to cross the deserts. If I'd have gone with the what-ifs, I'd never have done it.
I've been caring for a long time, so yes, it's time for me to drag myself out, dust off the cobwebs.
You can't feel lonely in the outback. I felt oneness with nature. I really did.
Challenge myself mentally and physically, and this is the thing that I want to do.
Life, hope, dreams. That's next week on Compass.